Well, hello, this is Bob Carlson again, and I wanted to bring you another short devotional adapted out of my book, 30 Days in the Land of the Book. You can also download that devotional guide at bpchurch.com. I'll point you to that at the end of this short tour. So we're visiting the city of Hazor this morning. Now, Hazor was a fortress city, very important city on the trade routes way in the north of Israel, northern Galilee. Now, it was on a major route going up north and then east in the Fertile Crescent. So anybody who's going to come into Galilee and thus Israel from the north and even the east quite likely is going to pass through this trade route. So it's a very important city, of a gateway in the north of Israel. And because of that, it was heavily defended first by the Canaanites and then later by Israel. Now, the interesting thing about the site of Hazor is this is the largest archaeological tell in Israel, and yet you cannot see most of it. Most of it has not yet been revealed. It hasn't been fully uncovered yet. In fact, this large flat field behind me, that is the lower city of Hazor, and you can see it's mainly covered. There are several spots where they have done extensive excavations, but that's 170 acres, and it's just too expensive to uncover the entire lower city. But they have uncovered much of and gone several layers down, multiple layers in the upper city, which is over on the other side, and that's where we'll go next. Now, because it's such an important location, a gateway to the north, then it's always been heavily fortified. For instance, one of the things you can see is one of the last things that was built was an Israelite defense tower. This was probably built during the time of King Ahab, when Israel's trying to defend itself first against the Syrians, but especially from the Assyrian Empire beginning to move in from the north. You will also see evidence of what's called a three-chambered gate, or also called a Solomonic Gate. Now, when King Solomon fortified his kingdom, he strengthened the fortress cities of Lachish and Gezer and Megiddo, and also Hazor. And he's the one that developed this new three-chambered gate that had three chambers on each side. That was a much stronger gate, harder to penetrate, and than the gates in cities previous to that. So it's called a Solomonic Gate. You can walk right through the gates of Solomon, and up behind it, you get to really the highlight of this city, I think, and that's where you get a unique look at a piece of biblical history inside the ruins of an ancient Canaanite temple. Now, inside this temple, you see these stones that are left from the destruction of this temple. This temple it's a temple palace, and it was destroyed in a very, very intense fire, a fire that is much hotter, at least twice as hot as would normally be the case if you burned the building down. How did such a hot fire occur? Well, it's been suggested that the building was filled with additional fuel in order for it to be able to get so hot. That fuel would have been oil and grains and stores and other woods, articles and artifacts and idols that were found in the city. They were all crammed into this palace temple, and then it was set alight. Now, that aligns very closely with the story of Joshua. After Joshua defeats the city of Jericho, and he goes on to Ai, and then he turns north, and he proceeds into the north of Israel, and he then attacks the city of Hazor. And he takes Hazor, and he burns the city, and he would have burned the temple palace. And Hazor was one of those cities like Jericho where the Israelites did not take the spoils from their victory, but it was devoted to destruction as an offering to the Lord. And so all of those things, imagine, piled into this palace temple, and then the whole thing is set alight, and you have the result still seen in these stones today. These stones still cry out. But there's one problem with all that. How nicely that lines up with Joshua chapter 11, and yet archaeological dating, which seems pretty accurate here because of pottery and other indicators, that this destruction actually happened during the time of the judges, not during the time of Joshua. Well, how can that be? How can we reconcile? How can we put that apparent contradiction together? Well, there are some archaeologist in Israel named Yadin, and then Ben-Tor, and also an American archaeologist named Wood, who discovered, as they did some spot excavations in the lower city, that there was actually an earlier destruction of Hazor before this destruction that destroyed this palace temple. And that destruction was during the time of Joshua. And so it's most likely that the palace temple on this site or underneath this one was the one destroyed by Joshua. And this temple with its fiery destruction was the one destroyed in the period of Judges, just like Judges 4 seems to suggest, although it doesn't talk much about the destruction of the city itself. But what's most likely is Barak and Deborah, and after their victories, as Israel took that victory over this area from the Canaanites, that they determined to destroy the city of Hazor once and for all in the same manner that God had told Joshua to do it at first. And so they followed Joshua's pattern, and they filled the temple and the palace with fuel from the spoils of their victory, and they set the whole thing on fire, idols and all. And these stones continue to cry out. So when at first the archaeology evidence didn't seem to line up and time out with the story of the Bible, what do we need to do? We need to wait for what would still continue to be revealed. The life of faith is a lot like that, isn't it? Sometimes we just don't know all the information, and we don't know how things are going to play out. We don't know what is yet to come, and so we have to wait upon the Lord. And yet things seem too hard, and a battle that's before us, an obstacle in our way, seems more than we can ever accomplish. That's where the two aspects of the story, the conquering of Hazor and the contradiction in the dating, those two come together in this. God can be trusted. God can be trusted in order to help you to do that which you could not do on your own. Philippians chapter 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And you can believe that promise because God's word can be trusted. Even as sometimes, if the promise of God's word does not line up with your experience, keep waiting, keep trusting, wait for the rest of God's promise and working to be revealed. You will see, God can be trusted. I hope you have enjoyed this visit to the city of Hazor. And if you would like to continue on this devotional journey through the land of Israel, I invite you to go to bpchurch.com, and there you can download the electronic version, the ebook version of my booklet, 30 Days in the Land of the Book, and it'll take you on a 30-day devotional tour through biblical sites in Israel.